the issues better and is more prepared to move policy toward social justice?
Because you actually have to look at her positions. I mean, set aside the 1990s, if you will. There's been far too, much conversation about that. Unfortunately, President Clinton inflamed that with his frankly, abusive behavior towards a bunch of young activists last week. But, set that aside. Let's just talk about her running for Senate. And I actually, worked advance for her on her first trip into New York when it was known that she was going to run for Senate. Let's talk about her first presidential run back in 2008. And today, back in 2000, she ran to the left on guns. In 2008, she ran to the right of President Obama, tried to beat him up on the right, actually suggesting that it should be a states' rights issue. Now she's running to the left on guns, but she's taking money from the National Rifle Association's lobbyists who have begun to bundle for her. That leaves people, with a real trust deficit, trying to figure out what's going on.
Wait, I hadn't heard that one before. NRA, and we'll have to fact check this, but NRA lobbyists bundling money for Hillary Clinton rather than if they're going to bundle money for any Democrat, Bernie Sanders, who this is the one policy area where Sanders' record is more conservative than Clinton's, right?
Well, I mean, he has a D-. I don't know he has a D- from the National Rifle Association. That's his lifetime average. I don't know how D-minuses were treated in your household, and mine are treated the same as an F.
But he did vote against the Brady bill, which established the background checks, and he sticks to his position to this day on no lawsuits against manufacturers, a special protection.
No, actually, I mean, look, he has been very clear that his concern is about small gun shops. He's actually sponsoring, a bill right now around manufacturer liability. But on the issue, of Clinton, yeah, I mean, absolutely, it is well known. John Podesta was on MSNBC a few weeks ago, defending a fundraiser that was being held in D.C. that he was hosting, where there were National Rifle Association lobbyists and who were contributing to the campaign. Just as her campaign, first started out taking money from the private prison lobby, then they said they were not going to do that anymore, but the PAC is still taking money from the private prison lobby, and then you deal with just her stances on kind of core criminal justice issues. Again, 2008, she was the furthest to the right of all the Democrats on the issue of the crack powder disparity. Every Democrat said, of course, these addicts, disproportionately women, who have been treated as dealers and given, and punished as if they had a half kilo of powder when they only had 2 rocks of crack because of the 100-to-1 disparity. Of course, we will give them retroactive relief. Hillary Clinton was the only Democrat who said, no, I would not give them retroactive relief. And then this year, you have Bernie Sanders, who has always opposed the death penalty on stage. You have Martin O'Malley, who, as governor, led the first state south of the Mason-Dixon line to abolish the death penalty in doing so. And I actually worked that issue with him. And then you have Hillary Clinton, who, after Troy Davis, after all these innocent people have been released from death row and at least one executed on death row, says, no, I still support the death penalty.
She says she's for states abolishing the death penalty for ordinary crimes. I'm just articulating her position. She only says she supports it for federal terrorism cases, basically.
No. She says that it troubles her conscience. She says that states should do what they want to do, and if they want to abolish it, she supports that. But here's the thing, all right? My family has been involved in the black freedom struggle since before the end of slavery. We have been always clear that the death penalty is the spawn of lynching, and that it's almost exclusive use for the poor of all colors, and its disproportionate use against blacks substantiates that. And we have now had 6 Democratic governors between 2008 and today, from Connecticut, Maryland, across even her so-called other home state, the great state of Illinois, lead their states in abolishing it. There's no more room for debate here on the racism, on the bias against the poor, on the ineffectiveness, on the extreme expense. And the best we get out of her is that it troubles her conscience. If you want to abolish it, go ahead. But she will not come out and say that she's against it. She will not come out and call for the abolition of it.
One more issue on campaign donations. Sanders, of course, has no super PACs. Clinton defenders say the Sanders position is a smear because he can't point to any instance of Clinton ever being corrupted by the money and working for a special interest donor against the public interest. And he admits he's not accusing her of that. So, with that context, how far does the Sanders campaign want to push that issue?
The reality is that Clinton has the highest negatives we've ever seen of any Democratic front runner, and there's a reason. And Bernie has the highest in this primary by far, and there's a reason. People feel more comfortable when your campaign is funded by the people than it's funded by special interests. That's just the way that it goes. It's just the way that it goes. And that's not a smear. It's just people having a right to say, you know, look, in our society, you got two types of power. You have organized people, you have organized money. You know, if your money's coming from the people, if it's coming in small increments, then we believe that your campaign is ultimately accountable to the people. If your money's coming, it was being bundled by folks in large corporations, it's coming in large denominations, you know, then we worry that at the end of the day they're going to have preferred access. We had the Lincoln bedroom scandal and so many other things with past presidents that left us feeling like money talks in politics, and we've gone through these horrible judgments from the Supreme Court that you treat corporations like as if they're people, and allow them to spend unlimited dollars influencing our politics, and people are just saying enough is enough. You're going to represent the Democratic Party. We want to be clear. At the end of the day, you're accountable first and foremost and only to the people of this country.
You were president of the NAACP. I was looking up donor stories for them and saw that it gets big donations from Walmart and Shell Oil and Wachovia Bank, $1 million, tobacco money, and the NAACP has been well written about. So what's the single standard?
Again, I was not running for president of the United States, and at the time, you have to recall the role of the NAACP has often been to desegregate, to integrate the workforces of corporations. We've had partnerships with them ever since. It did not keep me from supporting the Employee Free Choice Act, from suing those corporations. It did mean, I mean, let's be clear, that they did have certain amount of access, and we use that both ways to advocate for their employees, to advocate for policies, to get Walmart to become the nation's largest employer of formerly incarcerated people. But the difference between a 501c3 nonprofit and the presidency of the United States, I think most people can see.
You were considering a Senate run, I gather, in Maryland for this year with Senator Mikulski retiring, and I gather you're not going to do that. But do you promise that if you ever run for office, you would not take any corporate or super PAC money?
Certainly. I mean, look, President Obama was clear, when he ran, that he did not want lobbyists funding his campaign. I would not want them funding my campaign. I think President Clinton should, frankly, run by the same standard.
Ben Jealous, former president and CEO of the NAACP, here representing the Sanders for President campaign, will continue to talk to representatives of the campaigns and hopefully to the candidates themselves by the time the New York primary comes around next Tuesday. Mr. Jealous, always nice to have you on the show. Thank you so much.
Appreciate you. Thank you very much.
Brian Lehrer on WNYC. Coming up next, how close to Mayor de Blasio is a new corruption scandal coming? We'll talk to New York Times investigative reporters Al Baker and William K. Rashbaum, who've been looking into the implications of how two real estate developers have been spreading their money around. Stay with us.
We look forward to a world founded upon four essential human freedoms.
In 1941, before Pearl Harbor, FDR tried to clarify America's national goals with a famous speech about 4 freedoms. Can you name them? And how do you think they're doing 75 years later? On The Takeaway, weekday afternoons at 3 on 93.9 FM.
WNYC receives support from Geico, offering auto insurance coverage for cars, trucks, or SUVs and providing 24/7 customer service. More information on auto insurance at geico.com or 1-800-947-AUTO. Adelphi University, now offering masters in general psychology, school psychology, and mental health counseling, as well as optional concentrations in substance abuse counseling and human resource management. More at adelphi.edu. WNYC is interested in your feedback. Help us understand what you want to hear and your listening preferences by taking our brief survey at wnyc.org/research. That's wnyc.org/research.
Today on the Leonard Lopate Show, some of the reporters who helped break the Panama Papers story talk about their unusual collaboration and how they processed that unprecedented amount of information. Plus, get a preview of this year's Tribeca Film Festival. That's today at noon on WNYC. Brian Lara on WNYC, and Mayor de Blasio went on Meet the Press yesterday speaking for Hillary Clinton's campaign, but ended up having to answer questions about his own fundraising and the widening FBI inquiry that started out somewhere else entirely but has led to the disciplining of 4 high-ranking NYPD officials and the revelation about a Ponzi scheme in Harlem. Confused about what this is and how close to the mayor it might be? So's everyone else. So joining me now to explain this investigation and where it seems to be heading are New York Times reporters William Rashbaum, who covers crime and corruption, and Al Baker, who covers policing and law enforcement for the Metropolitan Desk. Welcome back, both of you, to WNYC. Good morning.
Thanks, Brian. Good morning.
Good morning, Brian.
You used the word sprawling in your lead this morning to describe this investigation, which is focused on 2 men, Jonah Rechnitz and Jeremy Reichberg, who donated to and raised money for the mayor's campaign for office and to his related Campaign for One New York fund. So let's start at the beginning. Who are Reichberg and Rechnitz? What businesses are they in, and do they know each other?
I'll answer that, Brian. What we know about Mr. Rechnitz and Mr. Reichberg is somewhat limited, what we've been able to put together over the last few days. Mr. Rechnitz has a real estate management and development company. He owns a few buildings in Manhattan and Brooklyn. He lives on the Upper West Side. He has like Mr. Reichberg, shown himself to be a bit of a police buff. He has been generous in terms of his personal donations and money he's raised for the mayor's election campaign and for the Campaign for One New York, one of the mayor's nonprofit groups. We know less about Mr. Reichberg. He lives in Brooklyn. He has a consulting company that we don't know too much about, I'm afraid. And he held a fundraiser for the Campaign for One New York at his home in Brooklyn. In May of 2014, the mayor went out to this event and got quite a welcome in the neighborhood when he arrived.
Do they know each other? Do they work together on things?
We believe, yeah, they do know each other. In terms of working together on things, I don't know that I can answer that question. They both, have been involved with, pretty deeply involved with the police department mostly in Mr. Reichberg's community out in Brooklyn. They are close to a couple of other people who have come up in the investigation, or they're friendly with, I should say. The head of the Correction Officers Union, Mr. Seabrook, and also Philip Banks, who is the former chief of department of the NYPD.
So why would Rechnitz or Reichberg give gifts to police officials or the Corrections Union leader, Norman Seabrook? What would their motivation be?
To me, that's not entirely clear. You know, those are, I think, among the questions that we haven't answered.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there are whether they wanted to wield influence, make friends, bring these people closer into the community. I'm really not sure whether or not the people in the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office conducting the investigation have you know, better answers to those questions. I don't know.
So at its core, you're being told that this is an investigation into what influence they buy with the money they've been spreading around. Can you expand on that and where the line might be between legal and illegal?
You want to?
Yeah, I mean, I think what they're trying to figure out at this point in the investigation is precisely what influence may or may not have been at play. They have conversations with these two people. They have transactions, banking transactions, and they're trying to figure out what it all means. The federal process, the process for proving some kind of quid pro quo is quite rigorous in the federal statute, and you provide, you know, to figure out you provided X and you got Y, to pinpoint that very clearly is precisely what is the focus of the investigation.
Right. So the answers to that question, to those questions, are not known. But what the public found out about first were the police officers caught up in this when Commissioner Bratton took action against 4 high-ranking police officials. So what were they accused of?
The police officials came up in the investigation that the U.S. Attorney and the FBI initiated. They came up in the conversations that were heard, and when about 2.5 weeks ago, there was a point in the investigation when they wanted to speak with several people in the police department at the same moment, so that they would have stories from them, accounts from them at the same moment. They went out on one morning and spoke with all of them, and when something like that occurs, it begins to trickle out. And as word of this action trickled out, the confidence that the commissioner had in these 4 very high-ranking, very experienced police leaders, including Mr. Banks's former sort of right-hand deputy, Michael Harrington, they made a decision that, in conjunction with the FBI, that they could sort of sideline them, remove them from their current posts, and take away their guns and shields, put 2 of them on modified duty, and take them out of the administratively take them out of any kind of enforcement or operational position within the NYPD.
We're talking about this very confusing but beginning to unfold scandal to the extent that it turns into a scandal, but there is apparently an FBI investigation. Reportedly, U.S. Attorney Preet Bharara is looking into the money spread around by these 2 business people in the region of the campaign of Bill de Blasio for mayor and his associated group, the Campaign for One New York, to police and corrections union officials, as we've just been hearing, even a Ponzi scheme run out of a restaurant in Harlem allegedly related to this. So we're trying to connect the dots as best as anyone knows till now, and ask the question, is this potentially a Bill de Blasio scandal? We don't know yet whether or not it is. If you have any questions, listeners, for our 2 guests from the New York Times, William Rashbaum, who covers crime and corruption, and Al Baker, who covers policing and law enforcement, 212-433-WNYC, 212-433 9692. So here's the mayor on Meet the Press yesterday when host Chuck Todd asked about this fundraising inquiry.
Do you feel confident your campaign followed the law here?
I absolutely do, Chuck. We are very, very scrupulous about that. Everything we've done is appropriate and carefully done with many, many lawyers, I assure you. But I haven't heard anything about any investigation. There hasn't been any question posed to me or my team, and we don't have any evidence.
And can you say definitively, just one other part of this, was any money from your nonprofit, Campaign for One New York, used in your campaign?
No, totally separate things. Campaign for One New York was to achieve progressive change, things like affordable housing, pre-K for all. That was a separate entity that worked on those issues.
So you believe you're going to be totally cleared of anything with this?
Yeah, and we have no information about an investigation happening to begin with.
And so are both of you, as far as you know, convinced that the de Blasio administration has not been questioned or contacted at all, even with word that there is an investigation?
Well, I mean, word of an investigation is a public matter at this point. There's a criminal complaint that's public that's regarding one aspect of it. As far as official notification to the de Blasio administration, I mean, police commanders have been questioned. That's certainly part of the government's apparatus at high levels. I don't know about whether an official notification is a semantic thing or not. But
right. Well, the Daily News put it this way, that their sources say there's no investigation of the mayor, but there's an inquiry. Do you understand that distinction?
No one has, as far as I see here, no one has said the mayor, there's an investigation of the mayor. An inquiry, I think that's fairly plain that there is an investigation. There's actually, the roots of this are sort of two investigations. One that began within the NYPD. This was back in 2013 in the Internal Affairs Bureau, the part of the NYPD that's charged with rooting out wrongdoing and corruption within the ranks of police. That sort of low-level investigation within the PD was going along in the waning days of 2013 as the administrations were changing between Bloomberg and de Blasio. Later, around that same juncture, there was an ongoing federal inquiry, which sort of swirled around, suspicious transaction reports and the movement of large sums of money in and out of a wholesale liquor operation in Upper Manhattan that raised questions about what that was, and the people involved in that whose money was being moved was being investigated federally. At some point, the two entities, as they often do, the FBI, the NYPD, spoke about these parallel or these two different investigations and realized there were things in common and joined them. That was how this became one inquiry.
What would these two donors, can you go over what the two donors gave to the de Blasio campaign for mayor per se and to his related campaign for One New York, and also say what business they might have with the city? What might they hypothetically at least want for their money?
Well, I mean, Mr. Rector, I believe, Willie, correct me if I'm wrong here, but the mayor's 2013 campaign, I believe the sum was roughly $45,000 that he raised for the mayor-elect at that point, and he and his wife also gave almost $5,000 each, which was the maximum personal amount given. As far as what business they have before the city, if any, I'm not sure I'm precisely clear on that.
So it's still being investigated as to what they might want for their money. If they're the targets of an investigation involving possible corruption, we saw eventually in the Sheldon Silver case and the Dean Skelos case what people wanted for their money. In this case, it's not yet clear.
I would agree with that. I mean, as we reported today, this does draw a bright distinction between Mr. Bloomberg and Mr. de Blasio in terms of their personal wealth and their need to raise money for political pursuits. And Mr. de Blasio is under some criticism from good government groups and his opponents as well, who've sort of questioned his the consultants and lobbyists who swirl around him and who represent people before who have business before the city. But that's not to say that in this case that is proven. That's precisely what's being investigated.
And let me try to close one more loop here, and then we'll take a few phone calls from listeners. Regarding the Ponzi scheme, Hamlet Peralta, who ran a restaurant in Harlem and is charged with running a Ponzi scheme involving liquor sales, he is alleged to have paid off the police to ignore noise violations. How does that connect, if it does, with the Rechnitz and Reichberg NYPD gifts?
How does it connect? I mean, this is also something that is being currently examined. The investigation into records, a paper investigation, only takes authorities so far. What they would like is human interaction, and that's precisely what they're pursuing: conversations, interactions, relationships, and what those things mean. There are this could be a stew of lots of things, some related, some unrelated. I think that's not yet known. Mr. Peralta's purported Ponzi scheme, having investors submit large portions of money to a business he claimed was a wholesale liquor distribution business, is the entity in which the funds that drew attention were moving into and out of with a churning vigor. So again, I think which parts of this are relevant in an inquiry and which are not, and which is all sort of part of the investigation.
All right. Well, we have a full board of callers. We have time for a few with questions about what this is and what this isn't. And Ashton in Westchester, you're on WNYC. Hello, Ashton.
Hi. I have a question about how this will affect New York State, if not the city's politics, following the arrest of Sheldon Silver and Dean Sikos earlier this year.
Well, is it too early to speculate on how this will affect New York City or New York State politics, or if any kind of fallout from Silver and Skelos rains down on this investigation in any way?
I don't think there's been any indication, Brian, that there's been any crossover, and I think it's too soon to speculate or too soon to make a statement about how this is going to, whether or not we don't even know if anybody's going to face criminal charges here. We don't know. There are allegations that are being looked at, but it's a little too soon to. I mean, that talking about how it would affect state politics is we're getting a little ahead of ourselves with that.
Ruben in Midwood, you're on WNYC. Hi, Ruben.
Thanks, Brian. My question is for the two interviewers. If there's no perceivable reason that is given for the motives of Reichberg and Rechnitz, and something must have been a catalyst for the investigation or the inquiry, is it simply that if somebody makes a large donation or raises a